wabarakatuh. My name is Nurina Natasha. Today I will present about the food toxicology entitled Risk Analysis and Management System. So this is my slide. Okay, risk analysis. Today the topics that to be covered are risk assessment, risk management and risk communication. Okay, for risk analysis, risk is the probability that an event or hazardous will occur. Risk analysis is broadly defined to include risk assessment, risk characterization, risk communication, risk management, and policy relating to risk. The trinity of risk analysis consists of risk assessment, risk management, and risk communication. So this is the figure about the trinity of risk assessment, risk analysis. First one is the risk assessment, which consists of hazard identification, dose or response relationship, exposure assessment, and risk characterization. Risk characterization involves the estimation of risk, statement of uncertainty, while risk management consists of consideration of risk characterization, economical, political, and technological factors, and legislative mandate that leads to the regulatory decisions. And the risk communication consists of sociological components of risk acceptability, public opinions, and consideration of risk characterization. So, what is risk assessment? Risk assessment is the process of gathering all available information on the toxic effects of a substance and evaluating it to determine the possible risks associated with exposure. There are 4 steps of risk assessment. The first one is the hazard identification. Second is the dose response assessment. Third one is the exposure assessment, and the fourth one is the risk characterization. For the first one, which is the hazard identification, hazard identification is the process by which specific chemicals are causally linked to the production of particular health effects. The process involves gathering and evaluating toxicity data obtained from animal and human studies to determine the types of health effects produced and the conditions of exposure under which the effects may be produced. As the second one, dose response assessment is the procedures used to establish this dose or response relationship governed by the type of hazard, which are non-carcinogenic and carcinogenic hazards and are typically treated differently. The third one is exposure assessment. It is an estimate of the likely amount of human exposure. Human exposure to chemicals in diet is typically expressed as the product of the concentration of the chemical in various food and amounts of the food consumed. The last one is the risk characterization. It is the final stage of risk assessment. This involves describing the nature and often the magnitude of risk and includes any uncertainties. An accurate description hinges on the accuracy of the results of the first 3 steps, which again involve identifying the specific hazard, estimating the amount of exposure, and predicting the likelihood of adverse effects based on exposure. Okay, now we move on to the second steps in the hazard analysis, which are the risk management. Risk management is a process by which action to control a particular risk are identified, selected, and implemented. It represents a regulatory decision-making process that involves consideration of political, social, economic, and technological information. It requires the use of value judgment on issues which are such as the acceptability of risk and reasonableness of cost of control. The last one is the risk communication. It is one-way and technocratic. The government leaders, industry, or regulatory agencies provide risk assessment and risk management information with the aim that the public accept the risk message being conveyed and act accordingly. To obtain effective risk communication, the communicators required to recognize and overcome several obstacles that are rooted in the limitations of scientific risk assessment and in public understanding. However, the risk communication has a technical barriers. It includes the needs to make assumptions and subjective judgment in the risk assessment process. Disagreements among experts, risk information may frighten and frustrate the public, and the strong beliefs are hard to modify, and that naive views are easily manipulated by the method of presentation. So now we will move on to the Q&A session. The first question is, what is the definition of risk? A. The capacity of a substance to cause an adverse effect in a specific organ or organ system. B. The probability that a hazard will occur under specific exposure condition. And C. The weighing of the policy alternative and selection of the most appropriate regulatory action. The answer is B. The definition of risk is the probability that a hazard will occur under specific exposure condition. The second and last question is what is the 4 steps of risk assessment? Okay. Do you remember that risk assessment has 4 steps? The first step is hazard identification. Second, dose response assessment. Third, exposure assessment. And fourth, in the risk characterization. That's all from me. Thank you.